So today, Paul Cowie joins me, who's over in Scotland, Ross County coach, and many, many more. But he did start off as a teacher. So, Paul, I welcome you to the show.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Paul, could you please start us off then with your early days playing football when you were young?
Yeah, I grew up in the north of Scotland in a small town called Dingwall, where my home club was Ross County. Started playing there at a very young age, from a schoolboy all the way to semi-professional, and then about to become professional. And unfortunately, that's where I had an injury that curtailed my career in football. But I was brought up in a town called Dingwall and moved to Strathpeffer. But as I say, Ross County were my home club, so that's where I played most of my football as a youth player.
What's it like in Scotland? Because I've only been there a couple of times, but to play football there in the pyramid, is it easier said than done?
It's big range, big gulf and difference in terms of resources and the magnitudes of the clubs from the grassroots all the way to the Premiership. Ross County are, unfortunately just got relegated there last year from the Premiership, but they started off as a Highland League team in the lower tiers of football and managed to get an application into the Scottish leagues and then progressed quite quickly up through the leagues there into the Premier League. But playing in Scotland, as I said, it can be very different from junior football, amateur football, and then into professional. There's so many teams in Scotland, but I think the biggest challenge in Scotland is basically the resources and the money that's available to all teams and leagues, which you can see the difference between the Scottish Premiership and the English Premiership. The finances is huge difference in magnitude. So that's probably the biggest challenge for a lot of clubs up here.
You mentioned the Highland Leagues. So is that not connected to... So if you're in the Highland Leagues, if you keep getting promoted, you can't reach the Scottish Premiership, or you can?
Yeah, you can. There's a new playoff system. So basically the Highland League and the Lowland League, the two winners of those leagues will play each other. And then they will play the bottom team of the second division, or League Two, in Scotland to play off to enter that league. So there's a number of playoffs to get there. So it's quite challenging for the teams outside the Scottish Football League to get in. So yeah, they do have to go through a number of games to get there.
When you were younger, obviously we all have the aspiration to be a professional footballer, but were you good enough to be a professional footballer, considering you were on the cusp and then the injury happened?
Yeah, I was, very fortunate from a strong footballing family. My father played for Ross County. He was assistant manager. So we're always around football as kids. So because we're in the Highlands, you're probably a little bit detached from the central belt in terms of access. And yeah, there was a challenge to try and get to that professional level because there wasn't any professional teams actually within our vicinity. So you would have to travel down to Edinburgh, Glasgow, or Aberdeen to access that. I got to the stage where Ross County entered the Scottish Football League at the very beginning, playing well, captaining under 18s. A lot of clubs were interested in me, and I was looking to make that move down south. There's a number of clubs down there who were interested as well, and trials were happening, but unfortunately, the injury happened at the wrong time, and put a stop to that. But it didn't stop me trying to play. I tried to recover from injury, but unfortunately, it just didn't happen.
And then you transitioned to becoming a teacher. When did you make that career in that move in your career?
Basically, that happened as a result of my injury. As you said there, the aspiration was to become a professional footballer. The injury was quite a serious one. It took me a year to recover. It was my medial cartilage and my medial ligaments that I had really bad damage with. So it took a long year to recover. And within that year, I had to make a decision. Do I try and get back and play, which I did, obviously, but at the time that it became more serious in the second review of my injury a year later, I made the decision to go to university. And teaching, I went for PE teaching as my background, and that's what I wanted to be involved in. I always wanted to be involved in sport, played a lot of sport as a kid. So I thought that was the easiest sort of job to go for because it linked to all my things I enjoyed doing. So that's why I became a teacher.
And did you enjoy teaching? It's quite a different career to what you ended up doing now.
Yeah, well, the thing, as I said, PE teaching kept me related to sport. I moved down to Edinburgh and went to University of Edinburgh there to do my Bachelor's of Education. From there, I still played at a semi-professional level with a team called Spartans, and I played in the Lowland League actually. And when I was down in Edinburgh for a number of years, and played a number of teams. But that went and coincided with my teaching. Loved my teaching career. Was actually in a school called Westerhales Education Centre, which is in an area of deprivation in Edinburgh. Had many challenges as a school, but some amazing people worked there. And PE seemed to be a very favoured subject with a lot of the pupils in that school. So we were very fortunate that we had a big influence to try and change some of those young children's and lives in terms of their approach to education and moving forward into future steps for them. So yeah, I had a great time doing that. Loved it. Loved PE teaching. Loved the access, as I said, to different sports. And then that actually took me abroad. I ended up going abroad to teach as well in the international sector, which was in Singapore. So having that degree definitely opened the door to different avenues. So yeah, loved my time as a teacher.
When you were teaching in Singapore or back at home in Scotland, did you ever have the ambition in the back of your head to go ahead and become a football coach? Because the man-to-man sort of handling of everyday life as a PE teacher is probably pretty similar to what you are as a coach.
Yeah, there's so many transferable skills, whether it's soft skills or, as you said, my educational background. When I went abroad, I always was coaching. I was always involved in football, whether it was school teams, district teams, national teams. So I actually had two young boys out in Singapore, and they quickly got into football at a young age. So that probably reignited my sort of passion for coaching and helping them and coaching out there. And then that just gave me the sort of motivation to get back into the game at a higher level. So I really focused on that and tried to hone my skills and get my badges, which I've done in the last sort of 5 to 10 years.
So in 2019, you joined Dundee as the head of coaching. What was that like? How did you, that sounds like a big role for someone who's just going back into the game.
Yeah, well, I was traveling back and forth from Singapore to do my licenses with SFA. I think it was my B license I was doing at one time when I was traveling over. And my family and I moved back to Scotland in 2018. And I wanted to get into coaching just through some contacts and through the way I sort of maybe represent myself in the course. Got a sliding door moment to go and coach at Dundee United with Andy Goldie, who was the academy director at the time, who's now at Southampton. And I became one of the coaches there part-time. And that just really gave me the sort of foundation to go and kick on. And then about a year later, I was offered that head of coaching role, as you said. And that was probably the big change in the career in terms of going into football full time for the first time. So yeah, loved that role as well. Working with coaching staff and every player from pre-academy to the under-18 squads and into development squads. So yeah, it was a great learning experience and a quick learning experience in that year.
When you are the head of the coaches at a football club, what does that role entail? How often are you on the grass? How often are you with the players? And what is your job overall?
Head of coaching for me, I'm someone who likes to be on the grass. So where possible, I'm on the grass, whether it's supporting a coach, whether it's leading to try and share best practice. So that role for me was about relationships with the coaches. How do I help them become better coaches? My way of coaching is not the right way, shall we say. It's just the way I believe in my methodology. But it did help a lot of the staff at the club at the time. Player-wise, you're looking at the operational pathway. You're trying to help individuals. We had a big emphasis on individual player development at Dundee United to try and hone and harness their craft. So we had IDPs, which is a big focus. So, whether that was in individual or small groups, I would help that side of it on the grass, as well as the coaching as a mentor and a support mechanism for all the staff and players.
What was the best time at Dundee United?
Probably just been on the grass. I just loved coaching players. There's times where I actually had to take two teams, whether it was under 11s up to under 16s, 17s, 18s. I used to love working with the younger children because they just were like sponges. They were just always enthusiastic, very easy to coach and motivate. The older they get, they start to think they know a bit more about the game. So the challenges are to make them understand that there's still a lot of learning in the game. And they might have a lot of technical abilities in their game, but the tactical side becomes more a focus as they get older. But that's something we also try and embed in those players who are transitioning to that senior level. That yes, the tactical side is very important, but you still need to keep harnessing your technical development to ensure that you're the best prepared for that transition.
What is the difference between working with the youth players compared to working with the first team players? Because the first team players are all full time; it's their job. So I think, from my perspective, I'm going to guess that they're probably a bit more involved with it because they have to do this as a career.
Yeah, I think, having had that recent experience last year with the first team players in the Premiership, there's a difference. There's some who see it as a job. There are some who definitely look at their own attributes and want to make them better. So that, they want that individual coaching side of it after sessions or during sessions. I think the biggest challenge is it matters. At the senior level, results are important. It's their livelihoods. So that's a big challenge, as you said. At youth level, it's just all about enjoying the game with freedom. But that's something you try and transfer with the first team players. You need them to play with freedom and bravery and express themselves. So I think the biggest challenge is the pressure that you're under to make sure it's results driven, which is a big focus at the senior level. But you're trying to educate the young ones that that's where it's got to go to eventually. And it's, first of all, it's just developing them as an individual, as a player. But when they get older, it's about understanding and how to win.
I saw a professional / semi-professional, because now he's a professional footballer, and he was talking about his time in between the two and what it's like. What is the difference, in your opinion, between professional and semi-professional games?
Sometimes it can be small margins in terms of ability. Some of these players, obviously, they're working through the day, and then they're doing their coaching sessions at night, and then they're playing, and they're looking for that breakthrough. The biggest difference is just being able to invest in your football. It's not just you're on the pitch, it's off the pitch, it's the performance analysis side of it, it's the physical performance side of it. So there's more areas that they'll focus on and harness themselves. Their body's their job, they've got to look after it. So it's making sure they're well educated on nutrition as well. Obviously the emotional and psychological side of the game comes into it in the professional level. There's a big emphasis of support there as well, whereas you probably lack resources at the semi-professional level. The passion's still there, the desire's still there, the willingness is still there at semi-professional, but it's just the access, I think, is the biggest thing, and the resources that are available to you at professional level.
The most recent opportunity you had was with your brother at Ross County. What was that communication like? Did your brother just ring you up one day and say, "Do you want to come join me in the big league?"
Yeah, well, we're quite a close family. We get on very well. We've always been involved in football. Don had a very successful playing career, so we obviously followed him and went to a lot of games. But when it came to Don was the interim manager at Ross County. We talk all the time about the variances of the clubs that we were at and coaching. And the conversation just started to flow that, would I be interested in joining him if he became the permanent manager? And, thankfully for him, he got that opportunity. And then he asked me to come in and support him. And it was one of those ones you couldn't say no. I did have other offers at the same time from other clubs. But when it's your hometown club and the chance to work with your brother in a professional setting, I didn't think I had any hesitation in accepting that offer.
And what was it like on your first few days to be welcomed in to the club by your brother and to meet all these new people? But obviously the road ahead is going to be a long one.
Yeah, the good thing is I knew the area. Although I'd moved away a number of years ago, I still visited regularly. I knew quite a lot of people who were still at the club, so it was quite a smooth transition to get myself into the club. I think the biggest challenge is, acceptance. You're coming in as your brother's assistant, and it's, the mindset might be he's only in because of his brother. I would hope that, and from the responses I've had from people up there, that I was definitely received well in terms of my coaching ability and my capabilities. But the day-to-day handling with Dom was very good. We got on very well. I would challenge his opinion in the game, and it was up to him to take those perceptions and perspectives of the game. And we tried to work the best we could together to get the right results. Along with Carl Tremarco, who was with us in the first team coaching staff. So yeah, it was a great year. Unfortunately, it didn't end the way we wanted, but there's a lot of positives to reflect on and move forward with that.
Am I right in saying that the playoff match was the killer, and that was the game that got relegated?
Ultimately, yes, that was the ultimatum of losing the playoff. Yes, but I think there's other elements to that. We went on a very poor run. I think up until roughly March, April time before the split. In Scotland, they have the split. We were actually contesting for top 6 at one stage. And then we just went on a really bad run, unfortunately. And that's what resulted in us going to the playoff position. And then in the playoffs, we were actually 2-0 up, 3-1 in aggregate in the first half of the second leg. And then the game swung in the favour of Livingston, and unfortunately we lost that. So yeah, that was the ultimate game that got us relegated. But you can look back on the season, and we have reflected it, and I certainly have on my performance. But we did go on a very poor run. Unfortunately, we couldn't change that.
And what was it like to play against Rangers, to play against Celtic, to play against Aberdeen, all these top sides?
Yeah, it was a great challenge. Challenged me as a coach, challenged us as a coaching staff and a team of coaches. But great experience, great exposure. You're playing against Champions League players. You're playing against the best in the country. I would say we didn't do too well against the Old Firm throughout the year. I think there was only one game where we really got close to Celtic. We struggled against Rangers, particularly away from home. One game was my first game was down at Hampden Park, a full house against Rangers, where unfortunately we got a bit of a battering, shall we say. So that was a big one and a sore one to take, but a big steep learning curve. But yeah, great experience to be challenged against such top class opposition and managers and fellow coaching staff. So yeah, a lot to take from those games for sure.
You're working with some decent players out there as well. So, for example, Conor Randall, who used to play for Liverpool. What was he like to work with every single day?
Conor was great. Conor was our captain, our club captain. Conor is one of these players who just leads by example on the pitch. He looks after himself. He's 100% in the training pitch. He gives everything. His attitude's first class. Very receptive. Again, quite a sore one for him getting relegated, but a great professional, great lad, and he's done well for Ross County. He was obviously at Hearts as well. He was in Scotland, so he's had a good career, and hopefully he can keep that going and get him back up this year as the leader of the club.
Absolutely. And so, for example, with signings coming in and out of clubs, what is that like for you as a management team? Because you wouldn't have been the scout to find these players, but there would have been some conversations between you, the coaching staff, your brother, as to who we should bring in to improve the team.
Yeah, that's it's different at each club in terms of what resources you have available to you. At Ross County in particular, we had a head of recruitment called Greg Strong, who was based in England. Players were presented to us as coaching staff, where we would go and look at them ourselves. If it was possible to go and look at them in person, you would, but majority it was through video analysis and the due diligence of finding out their character from other people. So yeah, we would definitely, as a group, look at the players, discuss the players, and then obviously from the senior executive side of the club, they would then go and approach and try and get those players. But yes, the head of recruitment would definitely present the players to the manager and the coaching staff, and it'd be up to us to do our due diligence before we actually signed them.
And after the relegation happened, you then decided to, well, part ways with Ross County. What was that like to say goodbye to what would have been a brilliant year, regardless of the relegation?
Yeah, that was a very sore one in terms of how it ended. Obviously it was out with my brother's control. He obviously fought his case to keep us there, which is unfortunate. But the chairman seemed to have taken a different approach, and unfortunately, someone had to take the consequences of the relegation, and it was myself and Carl Tremarco who were let go. Very tough because you're told you've not done anything wrong. So that was a hard one. Maybe the lack of experience was something that was suggested as well. But in those scenarios, for me, where do you get your experience? And I think we had a very tough year. We were probably one of the smallest budgets in the league. The challenge was there. But as a year to reflect, I thought it was an excellent year for myself in terms of my own growth from an individual perspective. And I'm just now ready to use those experiences into my next role. And hopefully that'll happen soon.
What was the proudest moment of last season? Of course, there probably would be signing for the club, but maybe aside from that, what would have been the highlight of your year last year?
There was a few highlights, but not as many as you'd hoped. But just being in that environment, you're in the elite, you're at the top level of Scotland. You're in the top league. You're challenging yourself every day to be better. You're trying everything to make the players better, and support the manager as best you can to get the right results on the match days. We went on a small run around the festive period where the club we hadn't won away from home for a large spell before my time being there as well. So we went on this run in the festive period where we had 3 away wins in a row, which was a new club record against Aberdeen, Dundee and Kilmarnock, all away games over the festive period. And that was a real positive highlight, just winning and having that feeling of winning games at the top end of the game at the Scottish Premiership. So there were highlights. For me, seeing players grow and develop was one thing. I had real highs, seeing players getting recognised internationally, with players like Ronan Hale, our striker at the time, who managed to get himself recognised at Northern Ireland and made his debut recently. So that was great. And other players making their international debuts as well. So that was a highlight, knowing that you had supported those players, helped those players, and they're getting recognised at a higher level as well. So they were highlights too.
In your backroom staff, or when you were in a backroom staff, what sort of rules get enforced, or are you guys quite calm and relaxed and players can do what they wish? For example, some managers like to ban swapping of shirts. I heard that one manager doesn't allow their team to eat sausages. Is there any sort of rules that you bring into play as the manager?
In terms of rules, it's a different resource game, as I said, in Scotland. So when players swap shirts, it's at their own cost. So that's something that they might do it, but it'll be at their cost, as I said. But it's not something that's restricted. The club probably don't encourage it. It's not as common. The bigger teams tend to give you your shirts rather than the swaps. In terms of rules, it was all about attitude. It was all about effort and application. It was all about togetherness. I wouldn't say we were strict in terms of our approach, but we were definitely respectful in terms of how we got the best out of the players. In terms of rules, players manage their dressing rooms themselves in terms of their fine systems. Our nutrition is looked at from the chef is at the club, so you're definitely fueling them with the right food. So we don't have any problems with that. But today's sort of modern player, they seem to be more educated on their nutrition and things like that. So you're not really having to hold their hand and tell them what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. But if there's something that's recognised in terms of weight or things like that, it is highlighted, and it's more educated rather than slap in the wrist or a telling off. It's about nurturing the players and helping them be the best versions of themselves. That's basically the best way to put it.
So, Paul, obviously this summer you were let go by Ross County. What's been going on then behind the scenes? Is there any clubs that have been knocking on the door?
Well, I've had a busy period actually. After it happened, I'm currently on my UEFA Pro license, so I was fortunate with the timing. I had to go to Slovakia for the Euros, under 21 Euros, so that took my mind off it. So I was over there for over a week, doing a lot of tasks and watching games and analysing games. So that was good. Since I've come back, I managed to have my first holiday in a long time with the family. So we went to Croatia, so that was nice for a 10-day stint. And now it's just about networking and getting myself ready for the next role. So I've been doing a lot of preparation for that, preparing sessions again, making sure I'm up to date. Now going out to games again. I'll be at a game this weekend, so start observing and doing some match reports and analysis for my own benefit, just to keep myself finely tuned for that next role. But yeah, it's more networking and seeing what my support agent has for me in terms of what comes next. But there's been a couple of things that I've turned down overseas. Just not the right fit, unfortunately, but great to be presented with those opportunities. But it has made me think that it's not just Scotland. I'll definitely be thinking further afield.
So you would consider going abroad, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
No, I'm very open. I've lived in Asia for nearly 12 years, so I know what it's like to move abroad and work and live abroad. So it's just making sure it's right for the family, and that's very important. I've got 2 young boys, as I said, and my wife, so that's got to be right. But no, my family are open to that as well. So it's quite an exciting time. The unfortunate thing for the sort of senior roles in the professional game, you're waiting for other people to fail, which is not a nice thing to say, because that's how openings become presented to you, and then other opportunities that might come from that as well. But I'm very open. I'm not restricting myself to one area or one country, etc. So yeah, very open.
Well, Paul, I wish you the best of luck with that. I appreciate you joining me today. And wherever you end up, I'll be supporting you. And let's hope you bring home the success.
No, thank you very much for having me, and let's keep in touch, and hopefully I'll be somewhere soon where I can share that with you.
For sure.